Welcome to the first episode of the Dwell on It podcast that covers fascinating people from diverse fields ranging from the arts, entertainment, business, and more. Our first guest is Sushant Goel, founder of the supremely successful experiential coffee chain, Third Wave Coffee Roasters, that marries unparalleled community focus with coffee. I, for one, had a great time chatting with Sushant, and I hope that you find this conversation as interesting. Hi, Sushant. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you kind of taking the time and doing this from the UAE, especially given the time difference and everything else. Just to hit the ground running. Uh, and I don't think we've discussed this, you and I either. But I feel like the appeal of having Sushant and Third Wave kind of be the maiden voyage, like I told you for the podcast, is obviously manifold. But one of those essentially is the fact that you're an extremely interesting guy, right? Just personally, obviously, your experience kind of runs the breadth and width of essentially finance, consulting, data science, and a bunch of other stuff, which obviously we'll get into. But also equally importantly, you and your co-founders, of course, who we'll talk about, have built out an extremely tactile, very significant proposition in Third Wave, right? Uh, which essentially has become or is maybe exalted as being a brand not just focused on the coffee, which is what it's kind of central to, but essentially the experience around it, right? And I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that. But of course, the stage is yours, right?
Sure. No, thanks, Rishi. Firstly, extremely privileged to be doing this, and thank you for sort of selecting me on the as the maiden voyage for your podcast. Very excited to be doing this. I think if I had to sort of backtrack, when I came back to India to start my first startup, I think a big part of really starting something up is having the courage to do so, right? So I think to all the entrepreneurs out there, and I think you would appreciate this too, is that half the battle is when you say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take a bet on myself, and I'm going to try and do something that nobody else has probably tried to do, and take on a journey that's going to be extremely hard, but is going to be very rewarding, right? I was reading about entrepreneurship from a fellow entrepreneur in Bombay. He runs a FMCG company called the Bombay Shaving Company, and you would probably know this brand. And he said probably the worst outcome is that you're broke and you've lost a number of years of your life. And the greatest outcome is you have a lot of money. But I think even a greater outcome than that is that you've built an incredibly powerful brand, something that people relate to, and that's something that you can go to your grave with, right? And I think that's one of the biggest reasons that led me to entrepreneurship, even before Third Wave, right? And I'll of course go into why Third Wave and what made us do this. So I think a big part of starting your own business is really the courage to be able to do so, and it's going to be a journey full of ups and downs. And I don't think any of us entrepreneurs, whether you're a technology entrepreneur, non-technology entrepreneur, in today's world, you have the new layer of crypto entrepreneurs too, right? So I would say that if you're any of those, I think. You wouldn't have seen a time like this. The last 1 year has been extremely difficult for everyone across the board, with the exception of a few whose businesses have obviously done very well. Um, but I think what really got my co-founders and I interested in the third wave coffee journey was really starting off from the sort of macros of where India is as a market, right? And I think the first thing that we saw was that India is probably going to be the largest consumer economy in the world. I know a lot of people have positioned us like that for many years, and we are still sort of playing catch up to China in a lot of ways. But my belief remains, very much in place that consumers are going to be people are going to demand India as the main consumer market in the world, right? And I think the way we looked at it was that there is obviously a whole host of international brands who have built out QSR coffee spaces. There were a bunch of sort of startups in India that were starting to do the same thing while we were starting to think and ruminating about the idea. And then you had like an erstwhile coffee brand in India that had grown to scale, and it then started over a period of time, unfortunately started seeing a loss of brand appeal to millennials, younger audiences, etc. Right? So there were like a lot of I would say a lot of learnings even prior to getting into the business, right? And I think the way we thought about it was that there is and I think first and foremost, what you need to decide is how large do you want to make something, right? Do you want to build a great lifestyle brand that allows the founders, the promoters to take home, good capital, be very close to your customers in terms of, maintain your core offering and your core audience that you started the business with? Or do you want to build it into a large scale, multi-city, pan-India brand, right? Or even I would say worldwide brand, right? And I think for us, Rishi, I think we decided very early on that, if we were going to do this, it was all in, right? So either we build a very large company or we die trying to do so, right? It's not either or. So I think a lot of the decisions and a lot of the ways that we have built out the building blocks in the company have been thought about that way, right from procuring the coffee from certain farms to how we thought about building out the brick and mortar experience, like you mentioned, right? I mean, a large part of the third wave journey is not so much about the coffee cup, but it's about how does the partner who's serving you the coffee greet you, what's the relationship and understanding and conversation that you have with them, that you have with the next table when you're having a cup of coffee at third wave. So there were like a bunch of factors that we thought about and designed in order for us to be able to build out this large scale experience that would be consistent over the years, right? I think the biggest challenge in this type of a business is that you can be a fad for like 2-3 months or 2-3 years and then slowly die away. And we definitely didn't want to be so, right? So I think building those building blocks was very important.
Sure. I mean, no, you kind of preempted a lot of my questions there, right? So thank you for that. But essentially, what I was trying to kind of get at was that the kind of the landscape that you guys were kind of facing, obviously 5 years ago when you set out on this journey, was one, large scale incumbents, like essentially the coffee days of the world. There's this sort of deeply entrenched operators locally as well as internationally, as well as kind of like you said, the QSR guys, right? So you were there. There was a significant there were headwinds in terms of incumbents, essentially.
Yeah.
But what did you kind of and they say every startup's journey is kind of like a like an adventure sport in a way, right? It's essentially it's rife with pitfalls and challenges but kind of the upside of the very short upsides are what kind of make the journey kind of worth the trouble, right? So what were kind of the pitfalls that you guys faced at the outset? If you could kind of talk to that, and then we'll jump into kind of the experience and how you guys kind of looked at the tactility of your products that you talked to.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you mentioned, right? I mean, firstly, extremely CapEx heavy business. So the first and foremost was really getting the capital together to even start one outlet, right? And I think India's, and you would know this coming from the real estate background, India has some of the highest commercial real estate rentals, right, in the world. So it makes a business like this extremely difficult from an overall profitability point of view. And therefore you have to really think hard about which city do you want to start off in. And, we chose Bangalore, and I would actually not say that, we thought deeply about, okay, do we need to be positioned next to a cafe coffee day, next to a Starbucks, next to some of these incumbents? We chose the space that had the least rental, right? And we fortunately found an audience around that area that worked really well. Of course, 5 years later, a couple of years later, we're doing a lot of retail science while deciding our next locations. But essentially, I think the first big challenge that you run into is where are you going to get the capital from, apart from your own capital that you're deploying, right? I think the second is that how do you build an experience that consumers want to come back to you every day, right? So I think, and I won't even get into the challenges of like really setting up and operationalizing it, but I mean, just to sort of throw some color on that, you have to find the right contractor, you have to find, and maybe I can sort of go back and start off from, you have to actually procure the raw material coffee beans, right? So you have to go to farmers. Typically in India, farmers procure from, they send most of their coffee abroad. So you have to first convince them to sell to you because, it's a matter of reputation that you have a particular estate and you're working with them. So they want to know the brand that's actually going to retail their coffee, right? So, we definitely had to fight a lot of challenges on different fronts, right? Whether it was the supply chain, whether it was building out the store, finding the right location. And then I think the fourth challenge that we ran into was really the people who were working with us at the cafes. And at that time, it was us really facing the customer, talking to the customer, telling them about why Third Wave is different from a Starbucks or from another competitor. And I think the first thing that we started seeing was that a lot of people would not have faith that this could grow into something which was much bigger, and therefore even our team members would leave for and it's shocking, but like if somebody offered them at another restaurant or at another cafe 1,000 rupees more, they would actually leave you, right? And it isn't like I'll come to you and have a conversation. It's like you don't show up for work the next day, right? Yeah. So I think that was a major challenge, right? Because you're short staffed, and then experience starts suffering. Sure. So I think these are some of the pitfalls that we ran into in the sort of early days of Third Wave. Sure, and of course, I don't look at it as pitfalls. I actually look at it as grave learnings, right? Because I think that's what allowed us to build what we have built today, and will continue to allow us to do so moving forward.
Sure. So before we kind of get into how kind of direct trade and all of that works, essentially, like you said, sourcing straight from the farm and things like that, this is an issue that I feel product first brands face a great deal, right? Which is the scalability issue. How do you essentially make sure your experience is enduring even at scale?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, aside from just essentially the blue collar workforce and just your people who kind of maybe in some cases don't show faith, for the lack of a better term, you kind of end up seeing this on both, right? The investor side, the supply side, as well as the demand side with these types of businesses. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so so let me sort of talk about on the demand side first, right? So I think the first thing that happens is, and we did a brand study a while ago, and what we noticed was that consumers across the world, and particularly in India, trust a brand that has scale far more than an individual outlet, right? Or an individual brand that has very limited presence. And the reason for that is consistency, right? So you think about the fact that we're in COVID times right now, and are you going to today order from a brand that is just fresh on the market, or are you going to order from a well-renowned international brand, right? So I think consistency and quality of experience consistently, right? Whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, if you consistently deliver the same experience, then you're going to win some form of customer love, right? And I think that's the first thing that we learned on the demand side, right? I think the other aspect that we saw is that every market in India is, and I'm talking specifically about India and the challenges to scale in India. But like one of the challenges that we saw is that when you move from a Bangalore to a Hyderabad, or a Hyderabad to a Pune, or a Pune to a Delhi, the heterogeneity of the market is extremely large, right? So you have, India is not a homogeneous market from any terms, right? So it's like every market is diverse, palette is different, consumers are different, what they demand is different. So to build an offering that sort of encompasses everyone and still you're able to maintain the same level of like financial metrics, customer metrics, is extremely difficult, right? So these are sort of challenges that we constantly face in terms of being able to scale, right? I think another challenge that we have run into traditionally has always been finding the right team members who are with you for a long period of time, right? Because like you would know, right? I mean, if you hire a first set of management team, you need them to be there for 5 years, right? And you want them to carry the DNA of you founders down to the next layer, right, in the organization. Because I think you would I think at Duolingo, one of the things you would concentrate on is, let me focus on the first customer experience and let me get that customer experience really right. But then can you, when let's say you're building out in a tier 2 city in India where you can't be at the store every day or visit the store, can the team that is there act as entrepreneurs, leaders at the store and be able to replicate that same experience? So finding those individual team members who have the right DNA, culture fit is very difficult, right? And this is a sort of blue collar problem that most businesses in our space in India face, right? So yeah, these are some of the sort of challenges in terms of scaling up.
Yeah, if you ask me, I'm a little biased, of course, clearly, but I honestly don't believe that this sort of obsessive focus on product and experience should be necessarily emancipated, for the lack of a better term, from, say, scalability or, essentially what, say, a large incumbent player can get to. And I feel businesses like yours essentially are betting on that long tail, right, of significant, enduring kind of demand that will kind of present itself if there is a significant differentiated kind of product in the market. So I feel, and you guys are kind of testament to the existence of such a market, right? Because I've noticed this across all of your locations. Third wave is the hardest place to find a place to sit at. So even it's essentially by virtue of the fact that it's always full, right? The next door kind of larger incumbent player will most certainly be free by all means, but a third wave is the hardest place to find a place at, right? So a kind of extension of that would be something I was reading on Zomato, right, which was pretty interesting, and I'll kind of look it up. So they list a category, right, that goes something to the effect of, people say this place is known for, right, and they do that for all their restaurants that they list and their outlets essentially. And so the third wave kind of, people say this place is known for, reads free Wi-Fi, quaint little place, fancy crowd, right? So
I didn't know
obviously,
that. That's
yeah.
that's really interesting. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I found out myself. So I was just wondering, so how do you kind of, how does that make you feel, right? Does that kind of reflect some of the ideals you guys were hoping to kind of get to,
Yeah.
or? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'll sort of, I think one brand that we really aspired to, and I'm sort of talking about a brand in the hospitality space, was like the Oberoi hotels, right? So whenever you would go to an Oberoi hotel, you would see that no matter which Oberoi you went to, the customer experience was far superior to any hotel that you went to, right? And the reason was because of a certain sort of training, a way they were given SOPs, and like we have a very rigorous training process, right? So somebody joins the organization, they spend 2 weeks in the organization understanding the DNA, the culture, apart from the rigor of like actually training on the product side, right? I'm just talking about the theoretical training of the culture, which is equally important as compared to actually making the coffee, right? So I think I think one of the main sort of experiences that we have tried to focus on, and as founders, what we are deeply obsessed about is the customer, right? So we are a deeply customer obsessed company. So I mean, I remember when we launched our loyalty app, where and of course this was the first move from becoming a purely brick and mortar company to having some digital experience for our customers. It was, at times we had a gap between the understanding of the product, and I'm talking about the loyalty app, at the corporate level versus at a store level, right? So what would happen is the customer experience, the customer would actually write to us on email or via the app that, hey, listen, I have a problem with the app, right? And the team at the store is not able to troubleshoot. So as founders, we would typically troubleshoot it at the corporate level, and then we would go back to the store and teach the store how to do it, right? And we have had a number of reviews on the app store where people actually say that, hey, listen, the founder helped me out, right? Sushant helped me out, or Ayush helped me out, or Anirudh helped me out, which is absolutely, I mean, of course it's easy to do when you're a small company, but it just shows the DNA. And I think that's what happens when, like, the store manager sees that, then he's like, okay, no work high high or small or large is not worth doing, right? I'm going to do everything from mopping the floor to greeting the customer to making sure their experience is great, right? I just want to sort of take a minute and reflect on this one incident that happened at a store where we had a customer break a coffee cup, right? We had, I remember this incident very well because the barista who was catering to that customer at that time had been interviewed and hired by me, right? And I remember a lot of people in the organization had said no to him joining, and we typically have an interview process, right? I had insisted that we ask him to join just because of the fact that he was very polite, very sincere, and didn't have really great communication skills, right? But he was able to communicate in his language to the customer and explain to the customer that no problem, I will get you another cup, right? And the customer was so touched that he wrote a rave review on Google about how Third Wave deeply cares about its customer experience, right? And I think
Right.
for us, that was one of the days where, and we have to do this consistently across the next 10, 15, 20 years, right? But I mean, this one incident really taught me that, they had learned a lot from who we were, the corporate team was, their store managers, their leaders were, right? So, so I think
Yeah.
it's a big part of our experience.
No, yeah, that's none of this is lost on me, particularly because I've kind of had these sort. I've long story short, I've broken a fair amount of coffee cups at third wave locations, right? And I've had everyone kind of be very nice to me. But essentially, you there's one thing that you notice with kind of the third wave stuff, which is that it's one thing is ingrained in them very innately, right? Which is kind of the ethos of the company, which is essentially it's about the experience, it's about the people, like you said. Sometimes it's just about being congenial, right? Nice to somebody, smiling, not just being very cut and dry,
Yeah.
like any other kind of location. So, kind of, if and obviously founders have their own kind of handbooks of what
Yeah.
they think the brand should be at the kind of the foundational level, right? But how do you kind of translate that to all of these baristas? And you've done it successfully, so maybe walk us through how you kind of have this ethos kind of transcend down to the very kind of foundation of the firm. And then it's a great segue for the tech kind of build out that you just mentioned. Just talk
Yeah.
to that as well a little
Yeah.
bit, please.
Yeah, so I think, like you mentioned, right? I think a big part of the third wave experience, and I think coffee in India is still not as habitual as it's in the West. So it's not like make the cup, give it to the customer, move on, right? It's not as transactional, right? So you have to try and build a non-transactional experience to whatever extent that you can. You're going to have periods and cases where the store is very full and you have to sort of very quickly churn out orders and you don't have time to build conversation. But I think a big part of our business is making sure customers come to us every single day, right? And this is any consumer focused business, whether it's an airline, a hotel, a restaurant, would constantly emphasize this, right? In terms of really translating it down to the barista, the partner at a store level, I would not say it's like rocket science. I think it's just rigorous training, constantly making sure people are looking at their learning and development within the organization. So I mean, let me not spend too much time on the customer experience side only, but a big part of what we concentrate on is that if somebody's joined us as a barista, how do you take that individual from a barista to a shift supervisor or to a store manager, right? How do you make sure that the organization deeply cares about them, their families, right? So I think one of the things that we did very early on was that we noticed that we did want to make sure that every individual who was part of third wave, their children's education was taken care of and their health benefits were taken care of. So as part of their sort of compensation package, we built out a children's education benefits package, right? So no matter what level of the organization you're in, you're going to get some amount of your remuneration coming through that, right? So I think these are things that we sort of tried to build on the culture side and tried to teach people that this is what's important. I think on the process side, it's fairly like you build out a playbook, people learn that playbook. There's constant we're now trying to build a tech integration where everyone has an app. Everyone has smartphones today, right? So there's an app on everyone's phone. On that app, they have constant reminders in terms of what they need to learn at a store level every day, right? Clear the table on time, greet the customer with a smile, small things like that, right? And we are able to track whether somebody's being able to do it or not. So I mean, technology has made our lives easier from that standpoint, but it's really about putting down those 10, 15, 20 things that are non-negotiables, right? You need to do it no matter what. If you don't do it and you don't do it consistently, then there is a significant problem in your attitude rather than anything else.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense, right? Firstly, kudos for, what you guys are doing for your people, right? I mean, it's huge, particularly in trying times such as these. It's a great way to kind of show your people that they matter. At the end of the day, culture is what kind of speaks volumes, and that's what a lot of us have to learn from. So kudos. But on the tech front, essentially, talk to, like you just said, there's a lot of optimization happening on the back end, right? But what about the front end? You feel like there could be tech interventions that third wave could kind of be the vanguard of, which would essentially kind of layer on that that facet of community and essentially stickiness, if you will.
Yeah. No, I think one of my other co-founders and we both have a sort of technology background. I have a little bit of a data science background, and I think one of the things that we started noticing was that over a period of time, we have to figure out how to start mapping consumer journeys, right? So what time do customers come to us? How much do they transact with? How often are they not coming back? Was there an experience problem? A bunch of things, right? And it's very hard to do if you have just a relationship with the customer that is a non-digital relationship, right? So I think the first thing that we thought about was that we have a consumer coming back to us at least 2 to 3 times a week, right? And therefore, we need to firstly reward them for coming back to us very often. So what we saw was that there were a whole host of off-the-shelf products in the market, and we didn't really like anything that could be customized to our needs. So we said we're going to actually go through the painful experience of building something out ourselves, right? So Ayush and I, my other co-founder Ayush and I, we sort of sat together and we said, this is how we need to think about the framework of our loyalty program. And apart from sort of mapping the customer journey and using it to increase sales and trying to push and understand what the consumer is thinking, it was really to reward the customer, right? So I think the first thing that we did, and I'm not sure if you're a user, but we saw that one is you can give a standard cashback, right? Which is what most loyalty programs do. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to start giving consumers a benefit of pre-buying their coffees. So what we would do is we would actually allow people to buy packs of 10, 15 or 20 cappuccinos, right? If cappuccino was your drink or whatever your drink was, you would typically pre-buy that, and you could use it for an indefinite period of time. And what we started seeing was that because people had this like ease of transacting and literally picking up your phone, scanning it at the counter, and then just being able to transact, we saw consumers having a lot more cups than they were previously, right? Because the experience is just so seamless. So we really thought deeply about it from that loyalty side, and I think consumers really appreciated it. And the other aspect that we wanted to start building on was that we're not a large incumbent, a large multinational player. So we had to build some form of recognizability, discoverability. And we knew that a lot of consumers were actually coming to Third Wave because of referral. So Rishi would refer another friend, and that's how you would end up coming to Third Wave, right? So we wanted to reward a Rishi, reward a Sushant for telling somebody else that visit this coffee shop, right? So we built a referral program, get a free cup of coffee if your friend comes with you, right? So these were sort of the hooks that we wanted to build as part of the loyalty program, and we were very successfully able to do it. Unfortunately, we had only about 5 months prior to launching the program when COVID hit, but we had 35,000 people download the app. It was and continues to be extremely successful, and it's going to be a large part of our play moving forward. Yeah.
Excellent. I feel like this it isn't just something that a lot of founders have to say, right? The layering on of a tech proposition to what is essentially a very brick and mortar business. I feel like we face that uh, a lot ourselves, because ours is essentially innately a brick and mortar business, very similar to yours. But there in the world of kind of tech interventions, I feel that there's a lot of upside that we can kind of bring to kind of reinventing these businesses, which you very well are. And speaking of, I've also noticed that you've kind of extended the product line with, easy coffee bags and stuff like that. So was that a decided effort to kind of, and having done that, how does that work with, complexities of SKUs and sourcing and things like that? I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, so I think the sourcing side is not so much a challenge once you're able to figure out the coffee supply chain, and we have long-term contracts with our coffee farmers, so there's no problem. What we saw was that people were starting to consume a lot of coffee at home. They didn't necessarily want to step out, and obviously COVID has expedited that a little bit because people are spending a lot more time in their homes. So we wanted to bring products into people's homes. A big part of becoming a brand is not so much just building out the brick and mortar stores and having people come to the coffee shops. It remains the centerpiece of our experience, but we also wanted people to take home third wave coffee, right? So I think we have obviously launched easy coffee bags, which is a quick 3-minute way to make a great cup of coffee at home. But we are also going to launch ready to drink beverages, bunch of new age coffee products that will allow people to consume coffee at home, right? And I think a little bit of it is driven, of course, by improving the same store revenue, but it's also to de-risk the business, right? You don't want to be completely brick and mortar focused. You want to start building out other aspects. But Rishi, just before that, I wanted to mention another aspect about third wave, which we haven't really spent time on, but I think a very strong driving factor, and this is something that I'm seeing as an emergence in some tier 1 cities and now tier 2 cities, is this form factor of community, right? And what we're starting to now see is that a large part of people wanting to come to a center like third wave, and this also extends to co-working, co-living spaces. I started seeing this at brands like WeWork too, is that people would come and spend time at these physical spaces because it gave them access to other people, right? And we definitely want to build some applications for this on our app, but I think a large part of third wave's mission and vision is to drive community, conversations, trust, safety, right? I think and some of our larger competitors have been able to do that, but community plays a very important role too, right? And a community doesn't only stand for what consumers believe in, but also what the brand believes in, right? So for example, we were very conscious about how much packaging and wastage do we use, right? Wastage do we have? So the environment is like a big portion of what we think about, while making sure customer experience doesn't suffer, right? So can you use less and less packaging while delivering to the consumer, right? So these are aspects and ethos, brand ethos that the brand stands for. And it starts reflecting in the type of people who visit your store, right? And that's very important, because you need to be sort of focused on trying to cater to a certain section of consumers before you open up to the wider audience.
No, that's great. I mean, I've noticed this myself, right? That at third wave is kind of democratized this in a huge way, because there's a lot of times I've heard, on the one hand, I've heard VCs on the phone working out of a third wave and their startups, right? So it would be great if third wave could just kind of facilitate those conversations.
Yeah. No. You'll see that on our app very soon. But very interestingly, now I hear we have a couple of VCs who are investors with us, and they now say that we don't want to be seen at a third wave because it potentially jeopardizes any secret conversation that we are having, right? So
right, no, for sure.
The world of capital is a little secretive at times, and you don't want to be exposed in the public necessarily.
That's true. But essentially, that's I'm glad you mentioned that community is a huge part of your ethos, right? And every brand has what I'd like to call their why, right? And that why kind of evolves. It starts out being something, and I guess a lot of brands get a lot of flack for having a continuously evolving why, but I feel like that's a great thing, right? To be able to kind of modernize and kind of contextualize your why to what's relevant. So what do you think was your why when you guys started out, and what is your why today, and what do you foresee it as being kind of in the midterm and the long term?
Yeah. I think, when we started off, I think the way we thought about it was that, why aren't there enough brands who consumers can access, that give a great customer experience? And when I talk about experience, I'm talking about product, everything encompassed, right, into one. And I think a big part of that was, can we do it at a price point that people are comfortable with, right? I think one of my biggest learnings was that even if you're at the top of the pyramid in terms of a consumer's preference, you have to be value conscious. You have to deliver value to the customer. Otherwise, you're going to become experiential, in the sense that you're going to become once in a lifetime rather than have a long customer lifetime value. And you would understand this because, it's very important that brands like us, once we have acquired a customer or have a customer, it's important they're with us for a very long time, right? So I think you have to be very value conscious. I think that's when we started off the business. I think today, when we look at what our why is, and I won't sort of talk about what our why could become, but I think when we look at it today, I think we still believe that out of home customer experiences, whether it is for coffee, food, just a chat with your friend, a business meeting, is still going to remain extremely relevant in the post-COVID world. And consumers will constantly need a place to, declutter, think about something different. I mean, I've encountered so many customers when I spend time with them, and they're like, we just love to come to Third Wave and have a cup of coffee with our daughter, right? And the reason is because it gives us a chance to step out of home and enter a safe environment and spend time where, nobody is really judgmental or nobody is really looking down, but it gives me a great customer experience every time. That's great for me, right? I think the why is also very different when I think about why do customers come to Third Wave, and therefore I can't sort of solidify and say, why am I doing this? There are like a multitude of whys why we're doing it, and I don't think anyone should give an entrepreneur flack for evolving their why, right? Because you're also going to sort of change your offering, time and again. So, today Third Wave's mission statement is to be an everyday experience brand. So we're not an everyday coffee brand, we're not an everyday food brand, we're not an everyday community brand, we're an everyday experience brand. What that essentially means is, tomorrow if we decide to do something very different from coffee, we'll still bring the same sort of ethos to that experience, right? I might decide to enter the co-living space, but 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 we'll take the same ethos and do that. But we want to be an
Hopefully
everyday.
with us.
Huh?
Hopefully with us in tow.
Yeah, of course. No, but it's an everyday experience brand, right? So I think the why keeps changing, but you have to still have the same ethos while you're on the journey.
No, like you rightly pointed out, right? I feel like value and just obsessive focus on product is what makes up the flywheel of growth for brands such as these, right? If you may. But essentially, tell us about what Sushant Goel's why is, right? You've talked about the brand, you've talked about the business journey, but what's your why, and how does that kind of tie into the
Yeah.
Third Wave, if it does at all?
Yeah. No, so I spoke about this a little earlier, right? I think a big part of who I am and who I've become is I definitely want to leave. And talking about leaving, which is a little morbid, but I definitely sort of want to have a legacy that I'm proud of in terms of my own personal work, and obviously that's what sort of gets me up every morning, takes me to work, keeps me really focused whenever I spend time with our customers. I mean, sort of giving you a example of what I do on my Sundays, and why the startup journey is extremely hard is, Sundays is a day where I don't really have any meetings, right? So I typically go to a store, I observe for 2 hours, talk to customers, try and understand why are they with us, why do they consistently visit, what are they not seeing on the menu. For example, I think one of the things we started seeing was a lot of people were coming on weekends with their families, right? And a lot of them didn't have offerings for their children, right? So we had to go back, and that was a learning that we had because we were there on a Sunday and we were doing this, right? So For me, it's a little bit, I'm a little customer obsessed. Like I love seeing a delight on a customer's face. Of course, if the customer is having a challenge in terms of placing an order or an experience they've had at Third Wave, then obviously I take note of that. We go back as a founding team and discuss that. And I think all three of us founders are really obsessed with like customer, right? I'm like you said, right? I have a finance and consulting background. So for me, I'm constantly thinking about what problems do I need to solve to make the experience better and better, right? We unfortunately don't have 40 years of legacy, but we are constantly trying to bring in leadership members who do, and keep adding value to the Third Wave. I can't really give you a definitive reason of what my why is, but if I had to sort of tell you why I am doing this, I think it's to A, leave a legacy. B, I think most entrepreneurs would lie and tell you that they're doing this not because of money, but founders do this because there are non-linear rewards in place, right? At times. And I think the third reason I do it is because I'm a little customer addicted. I really enjoy looking at sort of customer experiences, defining them, shaping them. And one of the greatest companies to learn that from is Amazon, right? I mean, you just see what they have built over the years, and constantly keep trying to aspire to do that in the offline space. So yeah, that's my why.
No, that's great. I mean, a lot of the times you see founders whose whys are very deeply entrenched in or kind of entwined with those of their company, right? And especially early stage as well as high growth companies as yours. So it's refreshing and it's really fun. So thank you for kind of letting us in. Before I kind of let you go, just a question that I'm curious about and that I feel I like to ask a lot of people I talk to is, are there any books that have essentially changed your life essentially? And if there are any as such, let us know, let me know. I'd love to kind of get in on that.
Yeah.
Obviously, if something that's top of mind, right? If you don't have anything right away, let
Yeah.
me know
Yeah.
whenever.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, I wouldn't say that there is a book or a number of books. I would say that there are a number of books that have had like impact on me. I think a book that I'm reading right now, which is extremely interesting, is The Psychology of Money. And I'm not sure if you have read it, but I think it's a deep insight into it's not so much a book about how do you grow your money or where do you put your money. I think it's really about how should you look at money, and I think that's an extremely interesting book. I think another book that was recommended to us by one of our advisors, he was the ex-chairman of Microsoft in India, and he's actually a customer who comes to Third Wave very often, and we spend time with him. And he told me about this book called The Experience Economy. And I think in the context of what we are discussing, it's very relevant because it really talks about these global brands like Disney, Starbucks, etc., and how they went about sort of building out their experiences, right? And how do they sort of constantly evolve to be able to remain relevant, right? Because customer preferences change. So I mean, let me give you a small example, right? So today there is a big sort of trend of veganism, right, in the world, and at times you have to cater to people who eat meat, people who are vegetarian, and people who are vegan, right? And how do you offer a certain range of SKUs that allow you to do so? How do you partner with the right companies? So I know, for example, Starbucks has just partnered recently with the Impossible Burger in China, to be able
Right.
to bring a vegan burger to their customers. And Domino's has done that very interestingly in India. Now they have the unthinkable pizza, right? The experience economy was really interesting because it also talks about how at times you don't need to sort of design for everything, right? If you sort of just build the fundamentals in place, automatically things will start building on top of it that will allow the the experience to unfold, right? So no one actually tells a customer, a partner who is serving you a cup of coffee to greet, right? It's about where have you hired that individual from, what are their values, not whether they stood first in class or whether they stood last in class. It's about, how respectful were they towards their teachers. So I never asked somebody, what were your marks in 10th grade, 12th grade, or in your hospitality management school. I actually asked them, recount an experience to me where you saw an incident that showed your character, right? Actually showed the person that you are. And that tells a whole host of things about an individual, because beyond the marks and competency, there's always that aspect. So yeah, the experience economy, 100%, please read it. I think while you're building out your venture, I think it's a great piece to read.
Fair enough. Thank you so much. Again, a lot of insight. I wish, we could kind of go on. I could take even, a couple more hours off your calendar, but I know there's only so much one can do. But thank you so much for giving us your time and, being so insightful. Hopefully this is just the first of many to come in terms of your visits and your presence on our platforms, physically in the brick and mortar real estate as well as online
Yeah,
on
yeah.
these platforms.
Yeah, no, and thanks for having me. And hopefully we can do this over a cup of coffee at Third Wave
Third wave,
next
yeah,
time.
yeah.
I'm looking really forward to getting back to that world. I miss it incredibly. I think we are, we have just curated a nice list of songs on our platform for consumers. So do check it out on Spotify, and it's a curated list that you can enjoy with whatever cup of coffee you're drinking. So I hope you can enjoy that.
Will do. Thank you so much. Pleasure
Thank
talking to
you.
you.